Thank you for joining. So what I'd like to do this morning is continue our discussion about Emunah, obviously, but particularly focus on three particular aspects, three particular midas, if you like, that really can detract from Emunah. And the reverse of this is that it seems to me that these particular midas, by working on them, even in a small way, can actually have a profound positive impact on Emunah. And I think the struggle we have often with Emunah, as we've spoken about in previous sessions, is really the idea that it seems to be something too vast to grasp, if you like. You know, when we talk about the concept of what Emunah really is, what faith is, it seems so all-encompassing that to bring it down, if you like, almost to a practical level is very difficult. You know, when we talk about practical tools on something so vast and so all-encompassing of what it means to be Jewish and what it means to approach life and everything else, bring it down to a practical level is always a bit of a struggle. So following Rav Wolber's ideas, as we've been using along the way, we're going to look at something which I think can really help in this regard. He refers to this as what he calls chinuch le'emunah, you know, which means really education towards emunah. How does one educate in terms of emunah? I think he really means educating oneself, if you like. What is the way one prepares the ground for a sense of emunah, for a sense of faith? And he says like this. He says, when we come to understand B'gishtenu levarer, mahu chinuch le'emunah, what is exactly education and what is the right approach towards educating ourselves towards emunah? He says, we'll be guided here by the Rambam. Yadrich Sono Rambam. And the Rambam says in his commentary to the Mishnah in Ovos the following thing. Omar, the Mishnah says, Hakino v'hatayva v'avas hakoved metzinas ha'odom min ha'olam. There are three things which can take a person away from this.
I'm on the thing now.
And what those things are kina, which is effectively jealousy, taiva, which is desire to too great an extent. We'll see. V'ahavas hakoved. Ahavas hakoved means running after or love of kavod and love of honor. They can take a person away from this world. The who and this is ki be'ele hamidos, with these midos, or one of them, in other words, just one of them alone, that through one of these things alone, a person can lose the concept of emunah that the Torah wishes us to develop, the emunah satorah itself. So this is a very, very important idea. The Rambam is saying that these three things, kinah, taiva, and kavod, remove a person min ha'olam, from the world. What does that mean? Hainu, he says, me emunoso. This means from one's faith. Ki olomo shel adam zeu emunoso. The real world a person inhabits, in the spiritual sense, is their faith. And he says, let's try and understand why it is that these particular three midos, these particular three traits, can detract from emunah. And I think what we'll see is an idea that through working on these three attributes, the kinah and the taiva and the kavod, one can also really take strides in one's emunah and one's faith. I wanted to actually mention at the beginning that the shir is dedicated this morning l'refuah. There's a very unfortunate a young woman who just gave birth a couple of weeks ago, who's very, very, very critically ill with COVID. She should have refuah shlema, lives in London. And this shir should be in her zechus. She should refuah. I think her name is Chava Chana, or Chana Rivka Bas Yehudis Malka, I think. Let's go through each one. So the Rav Wolber explains this. First one is the concept of taiva. He's talking about the taiva lacheftzei haguf. He says the idea of extreme desire, if you like, for physical pleasure. What that does, he says, is that entrenches a person if it's too great to too great an extent, it entrenches a person into this world, and therefore it essentially creates a tension and an opposition towards any sense of spirituality. the idea, he brings the Chovos Halavavos, the Chovos Halavavos says that the idea of the intention of the Torah is to try and enable our seichel to have more control than our physical selves. And therefore, the idea of a central idea of emunah itself, of what is faith, it is being sensitive to the existence of spirituality. That's what it is. That's really what emunah is. Emunah is being sensitive to the notion that there is a spiritual world, the sense of spirituality itself. So therefore, when we understand that, he says, a day will come that we will all have a greater sense through knowledge of spirituality, of faith, because when that time comes in the future, maybe someone Mashiach or the world to come, whatever it is, we'll have that greater automatic connection. But as long as we haven't yet arrived there, a very simple, straightforward pathway is simply developing a sensitivity to spiritual things, a sensitivity towards spiritual matters. And when a person is drawn after physical pleasures to too great an extent, what that does is that simply dulls the sensitivity towards spirituality, the existence, the metzias, the existence of ruchnis, the existence of spirituality. So that's the first aspect of what it is that can detract from emunah, the idea that we need to be sensitive to the existence of spiritual things. The second one, he says, is the idea of kinna. What is it? Why? How is jealousy related to emunah? He says like this, because what jealousy does to too great an extent, when one is jealous of what someone else has, it closes the pathway towards recognizing the essence of hashgacha, which is the divine involvement in this world, and the idea that Hashem gives us everything that we need. One who believes, which is a difficult thing to do, it takes a lot of work, of course, that Hashem provides everything we need, that leaves little space for wanting what someone else has. But of course, what that means is, and this is where I think it's very powerful, is that every time we're able to work on this idea of wanting what someone else, not wanting what someone else has, this every time we're able to work on that. You know, we mentioned this in the parasha as well, the idea of lo sachmoid, lo sachmoid, the last one of the Toras we learned yesterday in the parasha, is in a way the hardest one. The Ibn Ezra says that it is to not want someone else's things. It's natural human instinct. We see something, oh, I'd like that. This is very difficult. But the flip side of it is that every time we resist doing that, and every time we think to ourselves, hold on a minute, why do I want that? Because I think I deserve it. But if Hashem has decided that I don't, that's not for me, then that's fine. That's what Hashem has decided. That means that every time one works on lo sachmo, what have we done? We've developed our emunah. We've actually developed our faith. And that's a remarkable thing. Usually we think of faith as like I'm sitting there and I'm davening for hours in shul, and I'm thinking of like I'm reflecting on spiritual ideas. No. You develop your emunah, for example, by not wanting your neighbor's car. Why? Because because when you realize that you don't need that, and that's not for you because Hashem has decided that's not for you, that itself develops faith. That means you're believing that Hashem has given us everything we need. And finally, the third aspect he brings here is the idea of kavod. Now, he says like this, what does it mean? What does it mean to desire kavod, to desire honor? So this world, the Olam Hazeh, we understand, is the place where we have to work as hard as we can for a reward in the world to come. And someone, he says, who's focused on that idea is extremely careful not to run after honor. The Orchos Chaim LaHarosh, very famous ethical work written by the Rosh, one of the greatest of the Rishonim, says, "V'tira shelo tekabel schar ba'olam hazeh." You should be careful not to try and get your reward for what you've done in this world. What does he mean? He brings Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah is a remarkable piece. Listen to this. Rabbeinu Yonah says like this. Again, this is one of the Rishonim talking, and you see how remarkably contemporary this is. But Oda B'Veis HaKnesses, he sets a scene here. Someone is standing in shul. When we're in shul, we shouldn't be schmoozing to our friends, and even it's also the time of laning. So when you're in shul davening, you shouldn't talk in shul, shouldn't talk during laning. Fine. So far, so familiar. Now he says like this. He says, if a person has people sitting next to him schmoozing, talking in shul, he says, a person should just motion with his lips, and he should pretend that he's davening, even if he's not. Let's say that moment he's not davening for whatever reason, I don't know, he's finished them either, whatever it is, he's not actually davening himself. What you should do, he says you should pretend you're davening. But don't say, I don't talk in shul. If you see people schmooze, don't say, I don't talk in shul. Why? Because if you go ahead and you say, I'm sorry, I don't talk in shul, yeah? What are you doing? You're basically saying, I'm more important than you. Look, I'm doing the right thing. Look at me, yeah? You're like, it's like lording yourself over them. And that, he says, effectively means that you're getting a bit of reward for the mitzvah of not talking in shul. And he says, therefore, it's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing. Look at this tiny little idea. As I said, it's so contemporary. You can imagine the scene, and it's the easiest thing to do. Someone tries to talk to you in shul. Rabbeinu Yonah says, instead of saying to them, I'm sorry, I don't talk in shul, pretend you're davening. Because that way, you're not sort of lording it over them, and you don't talk, and they'll understand you're not talking because you're busy davening. And therefore, he says the whole reward is preserved for Olam Haba, for the world to come. So he says, he says, you see that someone who runs after kavod, after honor, is so far away from that sense of clarity of what it means of faith in the world to come. So what he's done here, in a very clever way, and he puts it, he sums it up like this. He says, what you see from the Rambam explanation of this mission in Pirkei Avos, that a person's world, that means the world that we inhabit from a perspective of faith, effectively means a clear understanding of the existence of spirituality, number one. Number two, the idea and recognition that of hashgacha pratis, that Hashem has direct involvement in the world. And number three, the idea that there is an aim for the world to come, the idea of Chai Olam Haba. And therefore, what are the three things which can detract from each of these are these three areas: the kinna, the taiva, the kinna, and the kavod. The taiva, the sense of desire for this world, dulls. If it becomes too much, it dulls our sense of appreciation for the spiritual because we're focused entirely on the physical. The idea of kinna, of wanting what someone else has, takes away our sense of faith in the fact that Hashem gives us everything we need, what we call hashgacha pratis. And the idea of running after kavod in this world, honor in this world, takes away from our appreciation of what Olam Haba is, that's the place of reward and not this world itself. So he says, you want to educate yourself towards emunah, work on these three areas. Work on even tiny, small steps in these three areas, not having an overbearing sense of the physical pleasure in this world, and also the idea of jealousy and wanting what other people have, and also the idea of kavod, not running after honor in the sense of what the other of honor in this particular world. I'd like to just finish with a very brief story, which I think is very relevant, especially in terms of the events of the previous week. As we know, there was several great leading rabbinic figures who passed away last week. One of them was Rabbi Toras, who I mentioned in my video before Shabbos. But just to, I came across on Shabbos, one of the magazines, one of the Jewish magazines had a remarkable story. Rabbi Toras, when he moved out of his house a few weeks ago, when his wife was tested positive for COVID, so he moved out so as not to get it himself. But then, of course, he found out he himself was positive as well. So he thought there was no point then being away from home. He might as well move back home. So he moved back home. He was a 90-year-old man. And on his way back to Yerushalayim, he was being taken back to Yerushalayim by his stepson. And he told his stepson the following story. He said like this on the way back to his house, and he passed away, as I say, about a couple of weeks later, beginning of last week. He said there was a rabbi who was trying to encourage people to observe more mitzvahs. And it was a difficult struggle. It wasn't so easy. But one day, there was a villager there, and he said to the rabbi, he told the rabbi that he'd started to keep kosher. And the rabbi was elated, and he saw an opportunity. He turned around to the man and he says, "Oh, you started keeping kosher. Maybe it's time to start keeping Shabbos." And the townsperson, the villager turns around to the rabbi and he snapped back and he said, "Don't be a chazer." So, you know, in other words, what was he saying? You've got to, you're asking too much. You've asked for one thing. Why are you asking for something more? At the moment I'm keeping kosher. Don't jump at me immediately to keep Shabbos. That was what he responded. Why is Rabbi Twersky telling this story? When he knew, Rabbi Twersky knew how ill he was. He was a medical doctor. He understood his situation. And he said to his stepson an amazing thing. He said, "I will not be a chazer," he said. "I will not claim that I did not derive enough from life. I'm 90 years old and I receive far more blessings than I have deserved. My father and several siblings died young. I have so much to be thankful for." And that was his last story that Rabbi Twersky, who told so many stories, that was the last story he told, right, before he passed away. That he's not going to leave this world as a chazan. In other words, wanting more and more and more and more. He says, "I've got incredible brachas to be grateful, thanks and blessings to be grateful for in life." And it's just a remarkable man to have that sense of mind, that presence of mind, to effectively convey that sense of being grateful for what we have. I think it really sums up a lot of this idea of what it means that when we, it is a lifetime's work, but when we develop a sense of being thankful for what we have, and that idea of not always wanting more, whether it's in terms of kinah, taiva, kavod, always wanting more and more and more, what we develop automatically is also a greater sense of faith, because it helps us realize and understand and be grateful for the blessings that we have. Thank you for joining this morning. So we're going to, next week will be the final in this series. I think we'll wrap it up. There'll be a set 6 in total. So we'll try and summarize and bring together everything that we've tried to convey in these short sessions. Have a very good week. Take care. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Have a good day.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Scott.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you for joining.